Well, good morning. My name is Matt Bowker, and I manage Rhodes Scholars' virtual lecture series, and it's my pleasure to host today's virtual field trip. You will be hearing from Kevin Flude. Kevin is a museum curator, archaeologist, and guide based in London. He has worked at numerous museums, including the Museum of London, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and at Oxford's Research Laboratory for Archaeology and the History of Art. So, let's make our way to London and meet Kevin for this virtual field trip.
Well, hello, welcome to London. And this is one of my greatest challenges for Rhodes Scholar to complete this topic in 30 minutes, but it's a really interesting topic. And we began with a lecture where we looked at the legendary and some of the archaeological aspects of the origins of London. And today we want to really concentrate on the archaeology, but with a nod back to the legends. Now, the legends were basically codified by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, but he used lots of other sources, and I'm just going to give you a summary of that, and then on the right you'll see an archaeological excavation, and we'll go through and find out what the archaeology has given to this subject of the origins of London. This is a summary of the legends. I won't go through it all, but essentially the idea was that Aeneas, who was a Trojan, fled from Troy at the end of the Trojan Wars, and he ended up in Italy, where he founded a dynasty of which Romulus and Remus were part of, and they founded Rome in 753 BC. So they were Trojans. Now, what happened was when the British was trying to find out what their origins were, they thought they wanted to link their story of Britain to the stories that are circulating amongst the Europeans, the Greeks and the Romans and other people. And so we wanted to link our story to the Trojan story. So what they did was they invented or found somebody called Brutus, who they said was the great-grandson or grandson of Aeneas. So Aeneas flees to Italy. His great-grandson or grandson is exiled from Italy, and he, with 300 ships, comes all the way to Britain, and he founds a new dynasty in Britain. And that dynasty survives all the way through much of British history, all the way, and I won't go through all the details of it, times of King Belinus, King Lear, and King Bladud, and kings like that. And then Cassivellaunus and King Lud are descended from Brutus, and they are here during the period of Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar mentions the Trinovantes, who are on the north bank of the Thames, and Geoffrey thinks this is a city, and he thinks that King Brutus in 1100 BC, before Rome was founded a new city on the bank of the Thames, and he called it Troia Nova. By 55 BC, it became called Trinovantum, and then when Cassivellaunus's brother, Cassivellaunus is a real person, Lud, becomes king, he puts a wall around this great city of New Troy, and people start calling it Lud's city, Lud's castle. And Dun in Welsh or Celtic is Dun. So Lud's Dun, Lud's castle. So we go from Troia Nova to Trinovantum, from Trinovantum to Lud's Dun, and from Lud's Dun to London. And that is basically the legendary story of Britain, which encompasses Christianity coming in 156, Romans leaving, King Arthur coming, and St. Paul's Cathedral being founded in AD 604. Now, I won't debunk all of that on this slide, but let's just find out what archaeology discovered. First of all, no evidence whatsoever for a city before the Romans. No evidence for a city of Trinovantum in Julius Caesar's time. There's a tribe called the Trinovantes on the north bank of the Thames, not a city called Trinovantum. So that's gone. Archaeologists discovered that London was founded, we think, in AD 50, about 7 years after the Claudian conquest in 43 AD. So Britain was conquered in 43 AD, and London was founded 7 or so years later. And then London grows. much more rapidly than we think. And then the other thing I want to pick out from these pieces in red really is what happened at the end of the Roman period. Instead of the legendary idea that the Romans leave and everything goes to hell in a handcart, and there's 200 years of dark age before Christianity comes in 604 and rescues it all, what archaeologists discovered was that the Romans actually declared independence. The Britons declared independence, kicked the Romans out in 407, and in 410 we then wrote to the Romans and said, look, we know we kicked you out. Well, could you come back? We're in trouble. The Romans said, sorry, we were too busy with Visigoths at the doors of Rome, so you have to look after yourself. And London did, and London seems to have been, from the archaeological evidence, deserted from 410 all the way through to 900. And that was a real surprise when we eventually were discovered that London, the city, was deserted all the way through to about the time of 900. We thought it would revive with Christianity's arrival for the second time in AD 604. So that's what we're going to have a look at. Right, so this is our map. We're going to start at the Tower of London over here to the right, and we're going to walk through the streets to the Forum and on to the Amphitheater, and then finish up at St. Paul's Cathedral. The map shows you the Tower, St. Paul's. Tate Modern's down here. This is London Bridge there, and you'll notice we've put in for you the city walls. These are the Roman city walls with this Roman fort here that was built around about 100 AD, the Roman Forum here, and you'll notice the Roman riverside is further north than the present day riverside, which I'll come back to. So we're now going to go by tube to the tower. We've got out of the tube, we're at the underground. You can see the sign, we're above the underground in fact, and there you can see the Tower of London, which we now know was actually found, there was something there in the Roman period. Nothing there in the prehistoric period, but certainly something there in the Roman period. But we're being gestured over here by this gentleman here who is Trajan. And we've come out of the tube, which is just there. The Tower of London is just over here to the right, and you can see this big slab of wall behind us. And here's Trajan, a Victorian copy, pointing to the city wall behind us. Now, according to legend, this was founded by King Lud in the pre-Roman period, and then restored by Queen Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great. Now, here you can see the Roman section of it. These red Roman stripes are red Roman bricks, and then there's a limestone stones, and so that is a Roman section of the wall. And when we've had the opportunity to get dating evidence of the wall, we find that it isn't pre-Roman, that it is indeed around about AD 200 AD, and this section here is medieval. So unfortunately the myths are proven wrong here. Now Trajan is pointing me to this copy of a Roman inscription on the wall in white over here to the left. And when they were digging Tower Hill tube station, making Tower Hill's tube station, they discovered this huge mausoleum, and they discovered this first part of it first. This says, to the spirits of dear departed, this manibus, to Julius Alpini Classicianus. Now this really surprised classical scholars, because in the aftermath of the Boudiccan revolts, there is a man mentioned as being in London, as being in Britain at this time by Roman writers, contemporary Roman writers. And so to find his tombstone was absolutely amazing. People said, well, it's a bit of a coincidence, maybe it's somebody else. And then 20, 30, 40 years later, they found another slab of it, which proved it was indeed he, because he was the procurator of the province of Britain. And this was set up by his wife, Julia, India, daughter, that's Philia, means daughter, of Picata, of the Indiana voting tribe, had this set up. So this is an amazing monument, and this man was a very important man in the aftermath of the Boudiccan revolt. She had slaughtered about 100,000 Romans, being killed, died after a battle where all her supporters were slaughtered by the Romans, and the civil war was still continuing. with no sign of it letting up. And this man, the second in command of the Roman province of Britain, wrote to Nero and said, look, you've got to get rid of the war hero and replace him by a conciliator, someone who will build peace, and otherwise you're going to lose the province of Britain. And Nero listened to his money manager, not his war hero, withdrew the war hero, introduced a conciliating governor, and we got 350 years of Roman rule of London from that wise decision. We're now going to move on, and we're going to go, this is the tube station on your right. We're heading towards that church, and to your left here, you can see the tallest building, I want to say in the European Union, but it's not anymore. It's now the tallest building in Western Europe, because we're no longer in the European Union. And that's or soon to be out of it. And on your right here is the tube station. We're going to go to that bit of grass there. Now, this is Tower Hill. It's a hill. Port of London building is on top of it, with a statue of Neptune there. People used to be beheaded here in the olden days, Thomas More, for example. And this is an image of King Brutus, this legendary Trojan king of Britain, and he's supposedly buried here. But I have to say that in all the archaeological excavations we've done, you get an idea, even in the 70s, how much archaeological work had been done in the city of London with all these little red dots. We've done most excavated city, one of the most excavated cities in the world, and we've found no evidence of a prehistoric city before the Romans, no evidence of Trojan settlement in the city of London. So that whole myth goes out the window, sadly. And the whole idea of the myth was probably to link the history of the kings of Britain to the kings of Rome, Greece, and Troy, and then the kings of Troy were linked to the sons of Noah, who was linked to Adam. And so the idea was to give Britain a chronology that went all the way back to Troy and then back to Genesis, and most of it made up, although some of the stories on the way were probably genuine stories. But finding out which was which is an impossible job. Anyway, so let's go back to the archaeology. So we've gone from the tower, we're now walking towards that church, which is just there. We come out of the garden, Trinity Gardens, and then over to the left is the Tower of London with Tower Bridge and the Mayor's County Hall over the river. And we turn right and we go towards the church where John Adams was married. And the church was very, very badly bombed in the Blitz. When they cleared it out and excavated it, they discovered the oldest arch in London, really, and it was reused Roman tiles, reused Roman stone, and probably dates to the Anglo-Saxon people of the 8th or 9th century, the oldest arch still existing in a church. And they found in the cellar, after World War II, they found Roman floor levels. Now, it's called All Hallows. It would be on my list of possible churches that were previously temples. No proof of that, absolutely no proof of that. There's some indications, possibly, but unfortunately, virtually anywhere you dig in the city, you'll find Roman remains. So the fact you've got Roman remains under a church doesn't mean there was a temple under the church. It just means there was a Roman house under the church. So there's no evidence that this was previously a temple, although it would be on my shortlist. Moving on, we're now going to go down to the River Thames down here. I'm just going to tell you about a site we found here, which gave insight into the, this is where we're looking. That's a Roman road, and that's the hill we're going to go down. And just near this Roman road, archaeologists discovered, a site at Plantation House. We're about here, and we're now looking towards Plantation House. And all this cross-hatching here is archaeologists found remains of houses burnt down by Queen Boudica or Queen Boadicea in AD 60. Graphic evidence of London being burnt down by Queen Boudica. And what was more exciting, archaeologists discovered a temporary fort here just after the Boudiccan revolt. So once Nero had agreed that we were going to try and keep London, Britain, as a Roman province, they built this fort here, and this fort was where they sort of fought back against the rebels and reconquered Britain. And then they built a forum, then they built amphitheater and bathhouses, and they rebuilt the city, which is what we're going to discover. This is the archaeological remains. Those are timbers burnt in the Boudiccan revolt, used to build the ramparts of the fort. And here is a reconstruction of the fort with Roman fort buildings and Roman. We found evidence of Roman tents as well, used for the garrison to defend and to retake the province of Britain. We're now going down the hill, and that's where the Roman riverfront was originally, and then later on it pushed forward to here, and then it pushed to the other side of these buildings, which is where we are going. We're going along the river. Here we go. That's Hms Belfast on the other side. We're going to walk along the river. Along here, look out for the joggers coming past us, and we're going to end up at that building at the end. But before we get to that building at the end, we are going to have a quick look at the river. Hms Belfast on the left, the tallest building in Western Europe, the Shard by Renzo Piano on the other side of the river. And here, so there's two mysteries remain about prehistoric Britain. So I'm telling you, there is no prehistoric London. There were rural settlements in the area, but no city. But scholars tell us that the name London comes from Proto-Indo-European language, and it was originally Ploonida, which became Londonida, which became London, which became Londinium. And so Ploonida means plur, flowing river, ondonida, settlement by the. So Ploonida means settlement by the flowing river. It's a prehistoric place name for a place that didn't exist in the prehistoric period. You see our problem. So what's the solution? It was probably a very small settlement, a village, but it was called Ploonida, and it gave its name to what became a Roman city. That's the first mystery. The second mystery is that there's a lot of very, very rich goods found deposited in the river, probably as offerings to the gods. And I'm just cycling through them now as I'm talking. Now, these were dredged up in the 19th century, both prehistoric and Roman remains. These are the Roman remains coming up now. That's a head of Hadrian. That's the copy of it. That's the real head in the British Museum. This is the next slide is of a castration device from the Roman period, and these are the prehistoric ones. That's a cauldron from 500 BC, a shield from 300 BC made of bronze, the Battersea Shield, the Wandsworth Shield from about 100 BC, the Waterloo helmet from about 100 BC, and then in the Museum of London, a whole load of swords, shields, helmets, axes, and even skulls found in the River Thames. So there's a lot of stuff in the River Thames, and there's no settlement that goes with it. So it was obviously an important place, but with no town. That's the kind of the story we have. Anyway, this is looking back from our current location at Billingsgate, and you can see in the distance there Tower Bridge. Tower Hill is over there, and the Tower of London is where those trees are. HMS Belfast in Southwark, and we're going to turn round, and behind us is Billingsgate. That's Billingsgate Fish Market, and we excavated underneath this building. And if you look at YouTube, you'll find a video of me talking about the excavation. But anyway, according to the legend, this was named after king or god Bilinos. According to rational archaeologists, it was named after an English person called Billings, which is true. We don't really know, to be honest, but according to legend, there was some important structure here, a tower or a lighthouse or a gate. And the evidence for this is the legend of Bilinos, who was supposed to be memorialized by a statue on top of this edifice, which is, you can see here in its 18th century imagination of this particular area in the pre-Roman period. Or, and this is the Trier medallion dating to 296 AD. It shows Caesar Constantine Chlorus rescuing London from a horde of mercenaries and a usurper, and that's the Caesar, and that's Londoners saying, thank the Caesar, you've come to rescue us. And that is London. The very first picture of London. It says Lun, that's the River Thames, very first picture of London. Now, what we don't know is whether that is the Monier trying to create an image of this gate or tower of Bilinos, or whether he's just said to his mate, anyone know what London looks like? No? Okay, I'll just put a gate there. So it's either an icon, or it might actually be an image of this thing that you first saw when you first arrived at London. Behind it, archaeologists found the port of London, and this shows you, this is the Thames at the bottom. This is a stream flowing into the River Thames. That drain is 2,000 years old. This is gravel where the boats were unloaded, and these are the warehouses. That's the wall of the warehouse, the back wall of the warehouse, the side wall of the warehouse, and that wooden floor is 2,000 years old with a wooden gate which has not appeared, which has not survived, but the wooden floor still survives from 2,000 years. Here you have got a reconstruction of that picture. There's the warehouses. That's where the stream flows down. And here's a Roman boat unloading its goods with the River Thames in the distance. So what we're going to do now is walk along to the river, the London Bridge. Here is where we are. We're walking along here towards the London Bridge and then up to the Forum. This is the position, the bridge. Southwark Cathedral on the other side of the river, which claims to have been built in AD 605, and we're going to walk along to the bridge. We started up here with this church temple there, past this river, which I didn't mention, past this villa, which I didn't mention, past all these warehouses, which I did mention. That's the warehouse we had a quick look at, and we are now standing there, going to walk up to the Roman Forum, to the Roman Basilica, to the Roman Market, to the Roman Town Hall, and to St. Peter's Church. And then we're going to walk down into the valley of the River Walbrook and to the Roman Amphitheater, which is just out of sight, just over here. Now, you'll see this artistic reconstruction based upon archaeological evidence. The river is open. There's no wall along here, although there is a wall, which we've already seen, around the landward side. But within 100 years, the Romans had built a wall along the river. Those warehouses are now cut off from the port, which must have been very inconvenient. And did the Romans build a welcome or a defensive tower here to say this, keep out, or to say this is the great city of London? And so is this what that coin was hinting? Is this the gate that was pictured on that coin? Is this, or is it, was there something over here by Billingsgate? But anyway, we're going to go through this gate up to the Roman Forum, which is here. That's where the Forum is. We're going up this road and we're going down to ground level. This road, this is a crossroad today. It was a crossroad in the Roman period, and that was where the triangular pediment was that took you into the Forum. So we're now walking up there and we're going to where the flag is, where St. Peter's Church is. And there it is. Christopher Wren built this after the Great Fire of London, but according to tradition and to legend, this was founded in 156 AD by Pope Eleutherius, working with King Lucius, an unknown legendary king of Britain. That's St. Peter's Church. And according to this legend, he wrote to the Pope and said, I want to become a Christian, send me some people who can educate me in that particular subject. And that is the origins of Christianity in London. Now, well, the truth of this, we don't know, but archaeologists have always denied it because this is the Roman Forum. That church is just there. How on earth could this be a church when this is the Roman town hall? It couldn't possibly be. So this is a nonsense story. We do know that, for example, that in the reign of Constantine the Great, London sent a bishop to a council that took place in Arles in 314 AD. So there must have been a cathedral, but it can't have been here because this is the Roman town hall. Now, archaeologists in the 80s did an excavation underneath this building here with the white awnings on it. And what did we discover? We discovered that the Roman Forum was pulled down in roundabout AD 300 to 310, which is exactly the time where Constantine the Great was declaring himself to be emperor, and he was in Britain with his Christian mother, Helena. So it's now no longer impossible that this church, this is the entrance to the other side of St. Peter's Church, that's the entrance to it from Cornhill. There's no proof of this, but it was impossible for this to be a Christian church in the Roman period. And now that we know that the Forum was pulled down in 300 AD, it's possible that it was turned into a Christian church, and St. Peter's was the first Christian church, which was then abandoned when the Romans abandoned the city. So we're going to go from here quickly down to Cannon Street. And in Cannon Street, we're going to walk through, on the way to Cannon Street, through these lovely alleyways where very historic taverns are associated with Sam Weller and Dickens. And we're coming to this wonderful site where we found a Roman shop, and that Roman shop you could buy wine from France, Spain, Italy, Rhodes. Across the road from it are these rather wonderful, this wonderful thing. It's the same thing, one bit depicted a long time ago, and this is how it looks now. It's just recently been restored, and this is the London Stone. Now, we've got no idea what London Stone is. It's famous for being London Stone. That's all we know about it. It was famous in 12th century. The first Lord Mayor was called Henry Fitzaylwin of London Stone, but we don't know why it's famous. Now, if you're a rational archaeologist, it is a milestone from the Roman period where all distances were measured. If you're a folklorist, it's Brutus's stone. It's a coronation stone. It's the sword in the stone type stone. It's the London version of the stone of Scone. But whatever it is, it's always been famous for being it. And now we're walking up the River Walbrook, which is that road there. And that's the Bloomberg Centre on the left. And Bloomberg rebuilt the Roman Forum in this rather new, wonderful museum. And as we walk up the river, this used to be a river, by the way, you'll see this church by Christopher Wren, which is called St. Stephen's. The Lord Mayor of London lives in this building. This is a Lutyens Bank of England to the left, Royal Exchange to the right. And if we go back to the bottom of that road again, what we're now going to do is see what was underneath this building over to the left. And that's what it looked like before the building was built. This is the Bloomberg site. And we're also going to have a quick look at that building over the road there. Now look at this. This was excavated first in 1954. And you can see the hordes of Londoners coming to see what turned out to be the Temple of Mithras. And this is it. It looks a bit like a Christian church, but we knew it was the Temple of Mithras because they found the head of Mithras. And that is the head of Mithras being cleaned up by the two archaeologists in charge, Professor Grimes and his wife, Audrey Williams, who you'll be pleased to know got married later on, and that was the Temple of Mithras. One of the wonders, and that's what it may have looked like. If you imagine a sort of a mix between a Catholic church and a Masons or a Rotary Club meeting, all men, no women, no slaves, which is probably why the religion failed eventually, and we all became Christians. But that's what it may have looked like in the Roman period. Now, the site had an enormous range of interest, but what I want to show you very quickly are these wonderful pieces of these are Roman writing tablets. You just put some wax over here and you scratch your message on it. That's one is about a slave. This one is the first mention the word London, Londinio. And you write on by using these styli, and this is one stylus photographed 4 times because it's got writing on it. It's an absolutely amazing find. And what it says herb, which means the city of Rome, fortuna, which means fortune, and it says, I come from the city of Rome, I bring you a welcome gift with a sharp point that you may remember me. I ask if fortune allowed that I might be able to give as generously as the way is long and as my purse is empty. This is a souvenir stylus from the Roman period, AD 70, I think it dates to. We're just going to have a little look at what Roman city looked like from the excavation next door to the Bloomberg site. And you can see it's mostly made of timber, mostly single story. And as time goes on in this sequence, you see there's 2-story building at the end of the period and 1-story buildings at the end. These are some of the excavation scenes with a mosaic. And the most important finding was this drain, which you'll see in the next slide. And that was dated by dendrochronology to AD 4 47, and that's when London was founded, when this drain here was built in AD 47. So we're going to walk from the Bloomberg site to the Roman Amphitheater, where we're hardly going to stop. Amphitheater is where the Guildhall is, and where the statue of Gog Magog is. And we found the Roman Amphitheater, excavated it, and we found the entrance to it, and this is probably where the wild animals were kept, and this is where the gladiators waited for fighting on the sanded arena. And we are going to walk through the sanded arena, down to the main road, and on. We're going to finish at St. Paul's Cathedral. This was a revolutionary site in the 1970s for two reasons. First of all, because we were able to excavate on it for many years. And secondly, instead of having 2 professional archaeologists, we had 50. And this is some of them, including a very young me there. And because we were able to excavate very, very carefully, we were able to find the most smallest details. Now, this was always missed previously in any excavations, but this is essentially a clay floor with clay walls, which are dwarf walls for timber framing, and then it was covered, sealed by clay. So you've got a clay sandwich in which we were able to excavate and reveal the walls, these very, very ephemeral walls, which all the wood would have rotted. So that's why we didn't know about Roman London, how populous it was right at the early beginnings, because we couldn't excavate these until we had time and the people and the money and the technology to do it. You see all this blackness is Boudiccan fire debris. So that's what that building looked like, a Roman style building. Next to it were 2 native style buildings, and then that's 50 AD. And then Queen Boadicea came along, burnt it down. And what was intriguing was after the excavation showed that the building to the left was rebuilt almost exactly along the same lines as it had been before it was burnt down by Queen Boadicea, but the round buildings were never rebuilt and replaced by these Roman style buildings, commercial buildings with shops at the front, workshops at the back. And I've nearly finished. What that site, not only did it tell us about the early Roman period, but it was much more populated than we believed, but it showed us this sequence here. That's the Roman horizon at the bottom. And surprisingly, this came to an end in 140 AD, which was a very big surprise to us. Then covered by this dark earth, which has got virtually nothing of interest in it. So it seems to be abandoned area. And this abandonment, this period of abandonment, which is about 3 foot of abandonment, is dated by this ceiling layer here, which is 10th century, and this church wall, which is 10th century, and that skull, which is in the 10th century churchyard. So we have nothing happening in the city of London from AD 140 on this site to 900. Which was a complete surprise. We were expecting housing to start again in about AD 700, 600 when St. Paul's was founded, but no. Other sites go on to later, 250, 350, 400, but generally we find that the city is abandoned. This is what the city might have looked like when St. Paul's was founded in 604, abandoned. Nobody there apart from the church and possibly a royal palace just up here. I'm going to finish now with this sequence of slides. So what archaeology was able to show us was that London was not founded in the pre-Roman period. It grew very quickly with these timber phase of buildings in the early Roman period. It started to decline as early as 200, and by the 5th century it was almost empty. The Roman walls were being ruined, destroyed. The bridge fell down or was pulled down at some time, and the city was abandoned, and the old Roman city was abandoned. Now 200 years later, what happened was we were excavating in the city and finding nothing in 600, 700, 800 AD, and our friends were excavating over here in the country, and they kept on finding farms, English farms, Saxon farms, all the way here. Nothing, 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 Saxon farms, Saxon farms, Saxon farms. And so somebody eventually realized that what actually must have happened was the city became country and the country became city. So the city of Londinium was abandoned apart from St. Paul's, and when civilization began again around about 600. The cathedral was built, but Londoners moved into and settled in this area here of the Fleet Street, the Strand, Covent Garden. And so the city was abandoned, but London Wick, the port of London, the Wick of London was founded. So Londinium closed down, the Wick of London was built, and this is what it would have looked like. People living in this area, in London Wick, the Londinium abandoned, apart from St Paul's Cathedral. Then what happened was the Vikings came up the river, burnt London down a couple of times, and probably King Alfred said, look, for God's sake, move back into the city. It's got a good wall. And so what happened was Londoners moved back into the city. So we have Londinium over here, which is abandoned. London Wick is lived in for 300 years, and then in 886, in the end of the 9th century, Londoners moved back from London, the port of London, the Wick of London, back to the borough of London, and we move into Londonburg, Edinburgh, Londonburg, and then we drop the burg and it becomes London. And that's kind of the, I would say, a revolution in archaeological knowledge that has been done by 30, 40 years of one of the most intense series of excavations that there has ever been. And I've gone 5 minutes over, so my humble apologies. Sorry.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. Why did the Romans leave?
Why did the Romans leave? Well, as I said, first of all, they were kicked out from Britain, probably because they weren't giving anymore. But basically what happened was that it's a very, very complicated question, but essentially they could not, in the end of the Roman period, they started using mercenaries to defend themselves. And these mercenaries were Saxons, Franks, Jutes, Goths, all sorts of nations. And eventually these people who were defending the Romans from their fellow barbarians, eventually they said, wait a minute, why are we protecting the Romans from our cousins when we could just take it all over? So essentially what happened was that the defenses of Western Europe, Western Roman Empire just collapsed because they weren't defending themselves, they were using mercenaries to defend themselves. And the economy collapsed as well. And so gradually Western Europe fell dark. Well, Eastern Roman Empire continued until 1400 and 54.
Okay, as a follow-up, we have a question from Judith. She says, well, she asks, did many Roman Britons speak Latin? And why did the Latin language disappear when the Anglo-Saxons conquered Britain?
Good question. Yeah, that is an incredibly good question, and it's a very long answer, but let's just start off with the beginning. How many people spoke Latin? Well, basically, we would guess about 10%. We've got Roman writing and Roman, it's all in Latin, by the way, or that writing I hinted was in Latin. So we know that the elite spoke Latin. And by the way, Latin wasn't given up. The church survived in Western Britain all the way through. And if you were to ask a 5th century person who spoke better Latin, Italians or British people, they would say British people spoke better Latin because we had the pure Latin because it wasn't being spoken anymore except for preserved by the church educated people. Well, in Latin, they were still speaking Latin and it deteriorated into Italian. So Latin did survive in Britain, but only as an elite educational language. The Anglo-Saxons spoke a different language, which was English, and they borrowed a few Latin words, but they didn't really start borrowing lots of Latin words until they started becoming Christians. And in fact, we only really got a lot of Latin in our language when the Normans, who were French, who spoke a Latin-based language, came over, and we borrowed lots of Latin words from the French, via the French. I hope that answers.
Early on, you discussed, or you showed a photo of red brick stripes on I think it was at the Tower of London.
Yep, the wall. Yeah.
So Martha wants to know, was the use of red brick functional or simply aesthetic?
Oh, very good. And the answer to that is sometimes it's aesthetic because it's just a couple of bricks at the edge of the wall. So Romans probably thought a wall should have a red stripe through it. But in the wall you saw there, those red bricks go all the way through the wall. Now, the Romans built that wall like a rubble. They built the outside and the inside as a proper wall. And then all they did was they got buckets loads of cement and stone, and they just dumped it in. So they had a rubble core to the wall, and so they felt it necessary to level it up every 3 feet with 3 courses of Roman brick. So it was structural in that sense, definitely structural, but occasionally it was decorative, and maybe it was both.
And Priscilla asks, and maybe you can elaborate on the building practices, but she wants to know, why didn't they construct their buildings with stone or brick, or with stone like other civilizations?
Well, they did. Okay, that just give you just one view of like if you were a Roman and you came to London, you'd think, what a hick town. Rome had a population of 1 million. London had a population of 30,000 probably. If you came from the countryside and you came to London, you think, blimey, what an amazing city. But London was, the early phase of London was built in wood, but increasingly, as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century came, they built in stone. The Forum was built in stone. The temples were built in stone. The amphitheater was built in stone. Rich people's houses were built in stone. The warehouses were built in stone. So it was the ordinary people's buildings were built in wood. But as the Roman period went on, it was increasingly stone and decreasingly wood.
Okay. By fell dark, does this mean everyone subsisted on agricultural survival and not trade? This is a question from Patrick.
Sorry, what was the first part of that question?
By fell dark. So when you talked about when the Romans left, there was
fell dark. Well,
yeah.
I said that gingerly because archaeologists don't like the word dark age. Archaeologists kind of don't really like this idea that the Romans went and we collapsed into nothing because we are pathetic. We can't manage ourselves, and people don't like that idea now. And they sort of think, well, actually, the Romans went. We probably thought, thank God they've gone, and now we don't have to give them taxes. So, so the Dark Ages was based upon this idea that when the Romans went, we had 200 years of anarchy. And archaeologists have tended to want to change that anarchy into a transition. So it's no longer dark age of anarchy, it's now a gradual transition from the Roman to the late antique. But strangely enough, I think archaeologists have begun to realize that they're being too sort of almost hippie about it. They're sort of love and peace. But actually, if you look at the history of Britain, there's lots of evidence of genocidal replacements of populations by incoming populations. So it's far from peaceful. So it may well have been anarchic. Now I'm just going to give you one interesting fact that a friend of mine who wrote a book on the decline and fall of Roman Empire. He's a classical scholar from Oxford. And anyway, what he discovered was, what he says in his book, is that if you look at the international trade of Roman Europe, and compare it to medieval Europe, he says that the amount of international trade in the Roman period was never equaled until the 15th century. So the Romans left, in Western Europe broke down in 400 to 500 AD. International trade virtually stopped, almost stopped, or it certainly declined dramatically. And he says it doesn't get back to the Roman amount of trade until 1500 AD. That's a depression that lasted 1,000 years. So rather than just being a gentle transition, there was a God almighty collapse of civilization that took a long time to the ramifications to move out the system and international trade to build back to what it was in the Roman period.
So thinking broadly, this is a question from Megan. She asks, so the legend was important to provide legitimacy for the monarchy. So with all of this archaeological research, has that undermined the legitimacy of the monarchy in Britain broadly?
That's a very good question. I think the answer is no. I think we don't. Does it undermine? No, I don't think it has undermined it. No, and it's very interesting what you say. What I was saying was that actually Henry VIII used that genealogy all the way back to Brutus, and he gave it to the Pope, and he said, that's why you're not in charge of me, because I've been here since the grandson of Aeneas, and I'm an emperor. and that means I can do what I like, and I don't have to do what you say, Mr. Pope. So it was it was incredibly important all the way through. It probably ceased to be important around about the 17th, 18th century, but all the way up to Henry VIII, people were very proud of our Trojan origins, but it gradually died out. We still are very fond of our monarchy, particularly Queen Elizabeth. So I think it'd take a lot to shake our faith in her. Yeah.
Okay. So we still have several questions. Mr. Feldman has a question. He asks, have any significant Roman relics or ruins been recovered through mudlarking along the shores of the Thames? And could you describe what mudlarking is?
Okay, mudlarking is an ancient sort of tradition whereby you just walk along the River Thames and you pick things up. And you can find all sorts of things. You can find, as you said, axes, skulls. You can find fish traps. You can find wharfs. You can find King Offa's palace. You can find all sorts of things. And the most amazing thing that archaeologists have found, they found a fish trap in Chelsea. They found what may be the remains of a King of Mercia's palace, and his name was Offa, O-F-F-A, King Offa. We might have found his palace in Chelsea. And on the river, archaeologists also found the remains of what may be a prehistoric bridge. If it was, if we found the other end of it, we would definitely say it was a bridge, but because we've only found one end of it, it might only be a pier or a wharf, but it's prehistoric. And it's very, very, very interesting. So mudlarking has found all sorts of stuff, and increasingly there have been a couple of really, really good books about mudlarking published. And we've done a lot of excavations on the waterfront at Greenwich, where Henry VIII used to spend his Christmases. So yeah, mudlarking is tremendously fun, interesting, and informative.
So some questions about archaeology in London in general. Marlena wants to know, how is it that so much archaeology could be done in the area? Is there a pause for any building project that allows for or requires digs? And who is in control of archaeological excavations? The City of London or some other organization?
No, basically originally what happened, it was done by the state, and then under Mrs. Thatcher it became sort of more private enterprise, but the Museum of London and Heritage England sort of control it. So what happens essentially is that if you want to say you want to build a new version of the Wells Fargo Bank in the City of London, you ask permission. It goes to the council, who look at it from aesthetic and architectural points of view and town planning points of view, but they also send a copy to the archaeologists, and the archaeologists do a desktop assessment, and they say, right, okay, they want to dig down to there was a basement there in the Victorian period, so we know that there's 10 foot of archaeology. We dug a Roman temple next door, and a Roman villa to the south of it, and so we've got 300 square feet of prime archaeology, 10 feet of it we need, and they will then say to Wells Fargo, we need a team of 100 for 5 years, and we need £5 million. And then Wells Fargo will say, okay, what about 3 people for a weekend, and we'll give you £100,000. And they'll negotiate, and then eventually they will normally negotiate something like 30 people for 6 months, and they'll excavate a bit of it properly, and they'll survey the rest of it. But they nearly always come to an agreement, because you never know, they might find something really, if they skimp on the archaeology, you never know, you might find we haven't yet found an early Christian church that we can prove is an early Roman Christian church. And you never know, you might find it, and there might be a little tin box in it, and you open the tin box and it might say, "Dear Londoners, love Paul." I mean, it could happen, I'm not unlikely to happen, but what I'm saying is, if they found a Roman Christian church, it would be, Wells Fargo's name would be mud. So it's much better for them to pay the archaeologists as a insurance policy. So that's what archaeology is, an insurance policy, so that they don't get fall foul of not only publicity, it's also insurance. So, for example, if the Secretary of State says you've got to stop that excavation because we found a really important Roman find, then Wells Fargo will have to cancel their building contracts or their architecture contracts, and that will cost them millions of pounds. It's much cheaper to give £500,000 to the archaeologists.
And so just a few more questions. Some questions about your experience as an archaeologist. So can you clarify, did you participate in digs near St. Paul's?
Yes, I did. I excavated, mostly around St. Paul's, in fact. From 1977 through to the 1980s, I worked in excavations around St. Paul's in the City of London. Yeah. Then I actually I went indoors actually, and worked in the curatorial side and worked at the Victoria and Albert Museum. So yes, I've done lots of excavations in the City of London.
Currently, are there any exciting archaeological excavations underway that you're eagerly awaiting?
Well, recently, yeah, there's always something interesting going. If you probably don't often hear about it because they're very rarely open to the public. Recently, they've been excavating a lot of Shakespearean sites. They've excavated every single one of Shakespeare's theatres and theatres that were theatres in the time of Shakespeare. So they've just recently excavated one in the East End of London, which is now the first theatre built in that era of history. So yeah, lots of interesting sites going on. There's lots of them.
Fantastic. Well, Kevin, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today. But I want to thank you very much for taking us on a whirlwind virtual field trip. And thanks to everyone, and I hope you enjoyed it. Kevin, thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you on a road scholar trip.